They look at you and see nothing. No words, no confessions, no explanations bleeding from your lips. To them, silence is absence, but your silence is not empty. It is heavy, like stone pressing on their chest, like the unblinking eye of something ancient that cannot be bribed, cannot be softened, cannot be swayed. In their world of constant noise, where dominance is measured by who shouts the loudest, you have done the most forbidden thing. You refuse to play, and in that refusal, you became untouchable. They thought silence meant weakness, but your silence is a blade hidden in velvet, sharper than every insult they hurled, deadlier than every lie they whispered. It is a curse they cannot lift. They wait for you to speak, to fill the void with something they can twist, something they can chain, something they can use against you. But nothing comes, and in that nothing they hear everything. They hear their guilt, their dishonesty, their trembling need for validation. They hear their own masks cracking under the weight of your refusal to give them fuel. You have felt it, how the room changes when you say nothing. Their voices stumble, their justifications multiply, their laughter sounds rehearsed. Silence forces them to confront themselves. And that confrontation is unbearable, because silence is not passive. It is a mirror. It reflects the monster they are, stripped of excuses, stripped of charm, stripped of their rehearsed dominance. When you are silent, they are naked, exposed, drowning in their own noise. This is why they hate you, why they call you distant, cold, cursed. They cannot control what they cannot predict. They cannot predict what they cannot decode. And you have made yourself unreadable. To them, it is witchcraft, an old curse passed down through forgotten bloodlines, written in languages buried with empires. But to you, it is survival. The silence you carry is forged in betrayal, shaped by the moments when words failed you, when confessions were used as weapons, when trust became a noose. You learn that silence is not retreat, it is resistance, it is strategy. And so, you wear it like armor. Every withheld word becomes a shield, every pause becomes a strike, every unanswered accusation becomes proof of your power. You no longer explain, you no longer justify, you no longer hand them the knife and beg them not to cut. You let them suffocate in the silence they cannot bear. They wanted a victim. Instead, you became a ghost haunting their pride. They call it a curse because they cannot name what it truly is. Power. Power they cannot touch, cannot dismantle, cannot chain. Power that does not shout but waits. Power that does not beg but observes. And as they unravel in the presence of your stillness, you finally understand the secret. You were never supposed to know. Silence is not the absence of voice. Silence is the presence of control. It is the curse they fear and the crown you carry. They were never strong on their own. They survived on noise, the chaos of arguments, the endless chorus of justifications, the desperate need for you to explain yourself. Every monster you've ever met has carried the same hunger, the need to provoke a reaction. Rage, tears, confusion, even laughter. It didn't matter which mask they wore, as long as it drew sound from your throat, because sound is fuel. Sound tells them they still have a hold on you. Silence, however, is starvation. You've seen it in their eyes. The twitch, the flicker, the panic buried beneath their smirk when you stop feeding them. They taunt louder, their words sharpen, their volume rises. But your silence is not weakness. It is a sealed door they cannot open, a door behind which they sense something ancient, something dangerous waiting. And the longer you hold it closed, the more they unravel. Their laughter turns brittle. Their questions repeat like broken chants. Their confidence disintegrates because silence leaves them with only themselves, and they are the very thing they cannot endure. Noise is their camouflage. Monsters don't stand tall in silence, they shrink. Without your reaction, their grand speeches collapse into hollow echoes. The lies they fling into the air circle back and pierce them, because there is nothing to drown the sound of their own deceit. They cannot survive in the stillness you create, and so they flail. They become louder, but not stronger, only exposed. They begin to show the cracks they've worked so hard to hide. In the absence of your voice, their mask starts to slide, and you see the trembling shadow beneath. This is the secret most never-learned monsters cannot bear the void. They are architects of noise, because silence is judgment they cannot argue against. Every second you withhold your words is a verdict heavier than any accusation. They are condemned by the quiet. They see reflections of their own weakness in it. Their parasitic hunger becomes obvious, their need for your reaction undeniable. What they call conversation was never a dialogue, it was a feeding, and the feast ends when you decide to stop speaking. Once, you thought your silence was isolation, that it marked you as powerless, but in truth, it was the one thing they could never control. Words can be twisted, but silence cannot be rewritten. In silence, you hold dominion. You become the one who dictates the rhythm of the battlefield. They claw for sound, but you remain still. They burn themselves out in a firestorm of noise while you stand untouched in the ashes. That is where the shift happens, where the prey becomes the predator, where the cursed becomes the curse. You are not withholding words out of fear. You are weaponizing absence. They feel it like a tightening rope, like invisible chains around their throat. Every unspoken thought of yours becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into. And when they finally crumble, when their noise falters into silence of its own, it is not because you spoke, but because you didn't. Your silence devours them whole. They stare at you and see nothing, yet in that nothing they begin to drown. Your silence is not an empty space. It is a mirror polished by every betrayal you endured, every lie you swallowed without reply. And when they look into it, they do not see you. They see themselves. Their words ricochet back at them, distorted, twisted, echoing louder than when they first spoke them. The more they try to search your face for answers, the more their own guilt spills onto the surface. You remain still, but inside them something fractures. The hall of mirrors begins with a single glance. One reflection becomes two become 10, until every corner of their mind is filled with distorted images of their own shadow. They wanted to provoke you, to pull sound from your lips, to confirm their illusions of control. Instead, your silence multiplies their fear. They watch themselves unravel, hearing their own lies whispered back to them in voices they cannot escape. What you hold is not just quiet, it is the stage where their demons perform. And no matter how hard they fight, they cannot silence the audience in their own mind. Every mirror is merciless. Every reflection reveals a secret they thought was buried. Your silence rips away the disguises they crafted so carefully, leaving only the raw and trembling truth. They see the cowardice behind their arrogance, They see the hunger behind their cruelty. They see the cracks in their armor widening with every second you refuse to play their game. You do not accuse. You do not defend. You do not explain. And in that refusal, their sins grow louder than your words ever could. It terrifies them because silence has become judgment, and judgment cannot be debated. Your stillness is a verdict. Your restraint is a sentence. They try to laugh to break it, to mock you into sound, but the laughter bounces back hollow and sharp, cutting into their own skin. They try to speak faster, louder, piling words into a frantic barricade, but the silence wraps around each syllable like a noose. They are not fighting you anymore. They are fighting themselves and losing. You see it in their eyes, the tremor of doubt, the sudden awareness that their power was never power at all. It was theater, kept alive only as long as you clapped. Without your applause, the stage collapses, and in the ruins, they meet themselves, raw, unmasked, monstrous. The silence you wield does not just reflect them. It exposes them to the core. This is why your silence feels like a curse, because in it, they are forced to confront the one enemy they cannot conquer, their own reflection. And once the mirror shatters, there is no returning to who they pretended to be. Your silence has become the prophecy they feared, the shadow that follows them, even in the light, the truth they can neither erase nor endure. They thought your silence meant surrender. They mistook your stillness for defeat, your refusal to speak as proof you had nothing left. But silence does not mean absence. It means waiting. It means listening to the cracks forming beneath the surface, watching their carefully painted masks begin to peel away under the weight of their own trembling words. At first, their voices are steady, rehearsed, dripping with the certainty of power. But silence is a mirror, and when they look into it long enough, the reflection staring back is not yours. It is their own weakness. You feel it, the subtle shift in the air. Their laughter comes too quickly now, brittle and sharp, a blade dulled by fear. Their explanations stretch longer, their justifications tangled like a web spun, too thin to hold. Silence exposes what noise conceals. Every word they utter, every breath they push into the void between you, collapses under its own weight. They cannot stand before you without filling the emptiness with excuses. And the more they speak, the more their armor corrodes. There is no need to fight them. The battle ended the moment you refused to give them what they craved. Your anger, your validation, your desperation. They lash out, louder, frantic, desperate to cover the sound of their own cracking walls. But you wait. You have always waited, and waiting has become the sharpest weapon. Every second of quiet tightens around their throat like an invisible hand. Their confidence fractures into doubt. Their certainty leaks into fear. Their masks slip, and beneath the paint is something pitiful, trembling, already broken. You are not powerless in this silence. You are the silence, and silence is merciless. It digs into them like an ancient symbol carved into stone, a truth too heavy to erase. Their armor was never forged from strength. It was built from the hollow metal of lies, from the fragile glass of appearance. And glass, under enough pressure, shatters. They thought they wore invincibility. What they carried was fragility disguised as strength, and your silence has revealed it with cruel precision. Watch how their hands twitch, how their gaze falters, how they search for approval in the darkness you refuse to fill. Their power shrinks in the quiet, their authority rots in the emptiness. They cannot command you anymore. They cannot chain you to their noise. The stage is theirs, yet they stumble like children in front of an audience that sees through them at last. You stand unmoved, untouched, while they unravel in their own desperate performance. And this is the fracture point, the moment when the predator realizes it was prey all along. They tried to feed on your weakness, but silence turned the hunt against them. Now they cannot escape the echo of their own deception. They collapse beneath the weight of the truth you never had to speak. Their armor is gone, scattered like dust in the void. And in the ruins of their false strength, they finally understand it was never your silence that cursed you. It was your silence that cursed them. They call it emptiness. They think silence is just a blank space, a void waiting to be filled. But what you carry is not emptiness. It is a sealed archive, a forbidden file no hand has the clearance to touch. Every time you refuse to explain, every time you hold your tongue, they feel the weight of that locked vault pressing against their skull. It is not what you've said that unsettles them. It is what you withhold. They can sense it, volumes of unspoken knowledge humming behind your eyes like static, encrypted lines of code they will never decipher. And in that absence, in that refusal to perform, they begin to drown. You've noticed it, haven't you? The way their laughter grows brittle when you don't join in. The way their accusations sharpen when you refuse to defend yourself. They call it arrogance, coldness, detachment. But the truth is simpler and far more dangerous. They are addicted to noise, and you are starving them of their supply. Your silence is the firewall they cannot breach, the one barrier that keeps their claws from dragging you back into their chaos. They hammer at the gates of your quiet with every word, every plea, every provocation. But the archive remains sealed, and with each failed attempt, their desperation twists into fear. You have become unreadable. That is your crime. In a world built on manipulation, where every gesture is currency and every weakness a commodity you refuse to trade. They cannot catalog you. They cannot anticipate your next move. To them, you are an error in the system, a corrupted line of data that refuses to process, and the unknown terrifies them more than any insult, any scream, any blade. They would rather face a storm than sit in a room with your silence, because storms at least follow patterns. You do not. The forbidden file grows heavier in their imagination the longer it stays locked. What truths are you hiding? What betrayals have you seen? What strategies have you stored away in the vault of your restraint? The questions gnaw at them in the dark, feeding paranoia until they begin confessing things you never asked, revealing wounds you never exposed. Without a single word, you've forced them into self-destruction. And still, you remain silent. Still, the file remains sealed. This is not passivity. This is power at its most refined. The kings of old built fortresses not to display wealth, but to remind invaders of the futility of conquest. Your silence is that fortress. Your refusal to open the file is not weakness, it is strategy. You know that what is unseen is always stronger than what is revealed. Shadows command more reverence than light. Mystery bends the spine where clarity does not. And in this silence, you are not the one on trial. They are, because when the file is never opened, when your silence holds firm, every monster is left alone with its own reflection. And that reflection is the curse. It is not you they fear. It is what they see in themselves when you refuse to speak. There was a time when silence felt like exile. You carried it like chains, dragging behind you through crowded rooms where every voice was sharper, louder, more certain. They mistook your quiet for submission, your restraint for fear. You believed them for a while. You thought silence meant weakness, that your refusal to speak stripped you of presence. But then you began to notice something. The longer you withheld, the more desperate they became. Their words spilled faster, their laughter cracked, their eyes darted, and in their unraveling, you realized the truth. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is gravity. You began to sense the shift like an ancient tide turning. Their noise was no longer a weapon. It was a confession. Each insult, each accusation, each desperate attempt to provoke you was proof of their hunger. They needed your reaction to validate their power, and you starved them. What once felt like isolation became strategy. What once burned like shame transformed into armor. You weren't mute. You were calculating. Every withheld word became a blade sharpened in the shadows. Every pause became a battlefield they could not cross. It was then you understood why ancient texts warned of the one who does not answer. To remain still in a world of chaos is to embody something unearthly. You became the unbroken wall, the silent watcher whose very existence unsettles the arrogant. Silence ceased to be absence. It became a storm contained. They could feel it even if they pretended not to. Your silence coiled around their pride, constricting until cracks began to form. Their power fractured not because you attacked, but because you refused to kneel. The awakening did not come with trumpets or triumph. It came in the quietest of ways, in your refusal to explain, to justify, to perform. You discovered that silence carries an ancient weight, the kind of weight that kings once feared and prophets once wielded. Power no longer lived in their noise. It lived in your restraint. You saw yourself not as the abandoned, but as the architect of unease, the one who makes monsters choke on their own voices. And the fear in their eyes confirmed what you had always suspected, but never dared to name. They were never stronger than you. They only appeared so because you kept filling the void with explanations, with apologies, with desperate attempts to be understood. Once you stopped, the illusion collapsed. Their rage was no longer terrifying. It was pitiful. Their words no longer stabbed. They flailed, harmless against the vastness of your silence. You had risen beyond their reach. Now, every unspoken thought radiates power. Every quiet stare becomes a prophecy. You are no longer the one on trial. You are the sentence they cannot escape, the echo that lingers when the room has emptied. The awakening is not in becoming louder, but in realizing you never needed to be. The monsters always feared your silence, because in it they see themselves undone. And now they cannot unsee it. They never feared you when you spoke. Words could be measured, dissected, dismissed. They could argue back, twist the meaning, drown you in their noise. But silence is a blade they cannot blunt. It lingers like a shadow in the corner of their vision, refusing to vanish even when they turn on every light. Your stillness unsettles them more than rage ever could, because silence carries judgment with without explanation. It tells them they are not worth the effort of words, and that is the deepest wound of all. You used to think silence was weakness, a prison that trapped you in your own mind while others dictated the narrative. But over time, you learned that silence does not trap, it starves. You starved the monsters of the reactions they needed to survive. They shouted, accused, laughed, demanded, and you gave them nothing. No fuel, no fire, no foothold. And in that nothing, they saw something far more terrifying than any answer you could have given: control. The silence grew into an atmosphere. Rooms shifted when you entered. Conversations faltered. People spoke less when you were near, as if afraid that your quiet was taking notes, recording their every crack, their every lie. They looked at you and saw not emptiness, but reflection, the mirror of their own corruption staring back at them. You didn't need to call them liars. They confessed it themselves in the trembling of their hands, in the way their eyes avoided yours. This is where silence became nightmare. It wasn't absence anymore. It was presence. You were no longer the one haunted by their voices. You had become the haunting itself, like an ancient symbol scrawled on the wall of a forgotten temple. You carried weight that no one could decode, but everyone could feel. They began to whisper your name differently, not as ridicule, but as warning. They told each other, do not provoke them, not because of what you might say, but because of what you might refuse to say. Monsters need the reassurance of chaos. They need to hear the clamor of resistance to convince themselves they still hold power. You denied them that luxury. Your silence was thunder with no storm, fire with no flame, an omen with no explanation. And in that void, their fear grew wild, feeding on itself until it consumed them. You became the figure they dreaded when the world went quiet at night. You became the silhouette in their mind that would not vanish, no matter how many lights they left on. What once marked you as powerless now marks you as untouchable. They cannot bargain with silence. They cannot manipulate it, cannot twist it, cannot bribe it. Your refusal to perform in their theater of noise exposes them more brutally than any accusation ever could. They see it now. You are not just the one they underestimated. You are the one their nightmares whispered about long before they knew your name. And in their restless sleep, when their own lies come back to choke them, it is your silence they hear, a silence that speaks louder than every scream, heavier than every chain, a silence that tells them the truth they cannot bear. You are not the monster. You are what the monsters fear. They always told you that silence was weakness, that your refusal to explain yourself, your refusal to beg, to justify, to bend, made you strange, dangerous. They whispered about you like you were cursed, as if the absence of your voice meant the presence of something unholy. And for a while, you believed them. You wondered if your quiet made you smaller, if it hollowed you out, if it chained you to the shadows. But the truth was never weakness. The truth was transformation. Because silence is not emptiness. It is pressure. It is weight. It is the sound of a storm building on the horizon that no one can stop. Every word you did not speak became a blade that cut through their illusion. Every pause became a mirror they could not look away from. They cursed your silence because it forced them to hear the noise of their own corruption, the echo of their own betrayals. What they hated in you was not absence. it was reflection. And when their laughter broke, when their confidence cracked, you understood you were not cursed. They were cursed to feel your silence like a noose tightening around their fragile egos, cursed to feel the unspoken judgment in every second you did not react. They wanted chaos, argument, confession. You gave them stillness, and stillness was poison. You became the one thing they could not predict, the one file they could not open, the one cipher they could not solve. You were the locked door at the end of a long corridor, and their minds tore themselves apart imagining what lived behind it. Because silence is not nothing. Silence is mystery, and mystery is the oldest form of power. Kings wore it as crowns. Priests guarded it as scripture. Strategists wielded it like fire. Now they call you monstrous because they cannot admit the truth, that your silence has outlasted their noise, that your restraint has revealed their desperation, that your shadows have devoured their light. They wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, because in the darkness they can still feel your presence. You don't chase them. You don't speak to them. You don't even acknowledge them. But silence doesn't need acknowledgement. Silence already speaks. Before, they thought you powerless. Now, they see the abyss in your eyes, and it terrifies them. Before, they thought you cursed. Now, they realize you are the curse. The curse they cannot break, the weight they cannot shake, the mirror they cannot shatter. You are not the monster in their stories. You are the reason monsters pray for daylight. You are the stillness that drags their secrets into the open, the quiet that makes them confess without words. And so you remain unmoved, unbroken, the silence they cannot endure, the haunting they cannot silence. You were never their victim. You were always their revelation.